Alan's phone buzzed with an unexpected notification, jolting him from his mid-morning routine. The alert was from the security system installed at his seldom-used summer house. The surveillance system had been a bundled deal, one of those offers too good to refuse. Alan had thought, why not? And decided to equip the summer house as well. It was a practical afterthought, a way to keep an eye on the property remotely. He had reasoned it might be useful for spotting the odd raccoon or stray cat that wandered too close to the house. But the camera feed now displayed a different scene, one that wrenched Alan's heart with an acute sense of distress. Alan, a self-made man, and his wife Caitlin had always been city dwellers. Their house in the city was more than comfortable. It was home. With his keen sense of financial stewardship, Alan was cautious with money, having clawed his way to a respectable fortune through grit and perseverance. The dream had always been to retire to the countryside one day, a fantasy of bucolic bliss where Alan, aged and wise, would spend his days in pastoral peace, possibly handing over the reins of his hard-earned business empire to a new generation. Yet life's unpredictable ebb had led them to this country house much sooner than planned. Sitting at his kitchen table, Alan replayed the footage, his mind racing with possibilities. Anything wrong? Caitlin's voice, warm with concern, broke his concentration. Alan snapped his laptop shut. It's nothing to worry about. Just a few work issues I need to sort out, he reassured. Caitlin gave a non-committal shrug and drifted away. Grasping his laptop more securely, Alan retreated to the solitude of the study. He watched the grainy figure pause, its movements deliberate. Caitlin might have pieced it together if she had known he was reviewing footage from the security cameras, but she remained blissfully unaware of their existence. That same evening, a rare quietude enveloped their house, allowing Alan to drift into reflection. As Alan watched his wife, he remembered her tales of the past, her dreams of domestic simplicity, evenings spent in sweatpants, indulging in scrambled eggs for dinner, and sharing the quiet end of the day with someone she loved. Yet despite her efforts, that level of intimacy and comfort had eluded her, leaving her feeling unfulfilled and inadequate. It was the raw honesty and determination in Caitlin's eyes that had captivated Alan when they first met. One memorable weekend, they ventured out on a hike, a shared adventure that reinforced their bond. As they descended the trail, a friendly offer from a stranger on an ATV was accepted without a second thought. But the joyride took a harrowing turn as the vehicle flipped on a precarious section of the path. Caitlin hit the ground with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs, Alan and the driver tumbling on top of her in a chaotic heap. "I need to go to the hospital," she gasped, pain radiating through her body. At the hospital, the severity of Caitlin's injuries came to light. Her pelvis was fractured in multiple places and her shoulder was broken. The next 6 weeks would confine her to a hospital bed, her world shrinking to the size of her recovery room. Friends circled around Caitlin, a rotating guard of love and support, including Mark, a childhood friend whose boyish features had matured into a rugged allure. It was during one of these evenings, as Mark kept vigil by her bedside, that he unveiled his long-concealed affection for her, a confession that left Caitlin reeling with surprise and a clandestine thrill. The following morning, as Alan walked in, bearing the sweetness of fresh fruits, his gaze fell upon Mark's flowers, and the air turned heavy with unspoken words. Caitlin, sensing the shift, was quick to affirm her commitment to Alan, even as a whisper of temptation brushed her consciousness, a whisper she silenced without hesitation. As time marched on, the day arrived for Caitlin to return home. Alan, ever the devoted partner, managed her transition with gentle care. Even when his own misfortune struck, a broken leg from a soccer accident, he found solace in Caitlin's willing embrace. It was in the dance of their mutual vulnerabilities, the exchange of care and comfort, that the depth of their connection truly revealed itself. Their wedding had the charming simplicity of an intimate gathering. Caitlin's side was modest but familial. Her parents, her sister, and the bustle of nieces and nephews filled the space with warmth. Alan's side, however, told a different story. A handful of friends, close as brothers, but no blood relatives to speak of. This disparity was a silent specter at the feast, a topic shrouded in a tacit understanding that it was not open for discussion. Whenever Caitlin's curiosity bubbled to the surface, Begging her to broach the subject of his absent family, Alan would offer a practiced smile and a gentle deflection. "I've never really had a big family," he once said, his voice laced with a finality that softly forbade further inquiries. It had been more than 6 years since Alan last spoke to his father, Ron. The estrangement had not been an abrupt severance, but the culmination of a myriad of painful episodes. It started with an argument with his stepmother. When Ron, Alan's father, had an affair with Amy while still married to Alan's mother, the betrayal shook the family's foundation. 8-year-old Alan, in a moment of pain and youthful indiscretion, had lashed out with an email to Amy that was unkind and raw. The sort of message only a child who doesn't grasp the full weight of adult complications could send. Alan often pondered whether Amy's coolness towards him was rooted in that long-ago message. It seemed unjust to him that he would be judged on the actions of his 8-year-old self, a boy reeling from his parents' turmoil. Alan's journey back to his father's life at 15 was not just a reunion, but a foray into a new world. His biological mother's mental health struggles had kept him at arm's length from Ron, but her passing, as tragic as it was, had reopened a door to a relationship long dormant. The initial meeting with Amy after the period of mourning his mother was a chance Alan embraced with a mix of trepidation and hope. He yearned for a maternal presence, a guiding hand, or at the very least, a friend in this woman who now shared his life. He made concerted efforts, gifts carefully chosen for the holidays, attempts to share activities with her, and even candid conversations where he laid bare his intentions. Despite Alan's earnest attempts at forming a connection, Amy's demeanor remained cold and distant. Her interactions with him were sparse and perfunctory, as if every word she spoke took a concerted effort. Whenever Alan entered the room, her discomfort was palpable. She would often behave as though she were the unwanted presence, an interloper in her own home despite the family's consistent reassurances to the contrary. "You know we love having you here, Amy," Ron would say, his voice a blend of confusion and concern, observing the tension that seemed to cloud over the room. "I'm not so sure," Amy would murmur, her gaze flickering to Alan with a glint of unease. "Sometimes it just feels like I'm in the way." Alan witnessed these exchanges with a sinking heart. On more than one occasion, he overheard the hushed conversations, the soft cadence of his father's attempts at consolation. "Nobody thinks that, Amy. You're imagining it," he heard his father insist gently, yet Amy's response was to quietly slip out the door, leaving a silent void in her wake. This pattern became a painful norm, Amy retreating from the space Alan occupied as if his very presence were an invisible barrier to her sense of belonging. Ron's visage would fall each time the front door closed behind her, a mixture of guilt and helplessness washing over him. Alan grappled with the situation, torn between his own desire for harmony and the unmistakable reality that his efforts were only driving a wedge further into the fragile structure of their blended family. During his college years, Alan's relationship with his stepmother grew increasingly strained, culminating in a particularly telling incident on the 4th of July. Alan was visiting his father Ron, and upon learning that Amy was planning to visit her own parents, he inquired about her plans for the holiday fireworks. "Are you staying for the fireworks tonight, Amy?" Alan asked, trying to make polite conversation. Amy, perhaps misinterpreting the gesture or feeling put on the spot, replied with a sharp tinge of defensiveness in her voice. "I was going to leave tomorrow, but since you're implying I should go now, I'll leave immediately." Despite protests from everyone insisting that wasn't what Alan meant and begging her to stay, Amy remained resolute and departed, leaving a wake of tension behind her. Alan's primary grievance with Amy was the possessiveness she exhibited over Ron's time. Whenever Ron shared moments with his son, Amy acted as if she were being betrayed. Her phone calls during their time together were laden with pointed remarks. Ron's phone would ring, and Amy's voice would come through the speaker, tinged with a feigned cheerfulness. "I'm learning to have fun without you, so don't hurry back on my account," she would say. Or her words would drip with sarcasm. "Maybe you should take Alan to Mexico instead of me like we planned. You two seem to have such a good time together." Alan couldn't fathom the depth of her jealousy. It reached a point where he felt like an unwelcome guest in his father's home. Ron, a pacifist by nature, recognized the tension, but chose not to address it directly with Amy, maintaining a stance of non-confrontation that only exacerbated the situation. The last straw came on Father's Day, cutting deep. Alan was not invited to spend the day with his father, a decision driven by Amy. Unable to hold back any longer, Alan confronted his father about Amy's behavior. In a heated exchange where emotions ran high, Alan expressed his bottled-up frustrations. "She's pushing me out of your life, Dad. Can't you see that?" Ron's patience was worn thin, and perhaps feeling cornered, he lashed back with words that left an indelible scar. "You know, Alan, your whole attitude has been a disappointment to me. If you ever want to have a family of your own, you better learn to change." The hurt from that conversation created a rift that had not healed. It was the last time Alan spoke to his father, a painful memory that lingered. The year Alan and Caitlin got married unfurled as a series of decisive moments, each turn steering them closer to their shared destiny. Alan, steadfast in his career at a prominent company, was on the brink of ascending to a coveted promotion. However, fate took an unforeseen twist when his boss's superior appointed an outsider for the role. "I can't believe they passed you over," Caitlin said one evening. Alan, with a determination in his eyes, replied, "It's a sign, Caitlin. It's time I took the reins of my own destiny." And with that, he embarked on his own venture within the confines of their apartment, serving as the cradle of his burgeoning business. Within months, his tireless work bore fruit, and he secured a modest office space to welcome his burgeoning clientele. Caitlin, in the throes of her final year of medical school, found herself juggling textbooks with business ledgers, offering unwavering support to Alan while navigating her own rigorous academic demands. Their evenings became a ritual of fleeting interactions, with Alan arriving late, collapsing into bed and rising with the sun, seeking the comfort of clean clothing and the prepared breakfast that awaited him. But the toll was manifesting. Sleep became a luxury, with nights often truncated to mere hours as Caitlin's routine morphed into a marathon of work and domesticity. Burnout loomed on her horizon, her resilience waning under the relentless pace. As his enterprise demanded even more of him, devouring weekends and its insatiable growth, Alan faced a crossroad. With the business gaining traction, he proposed a controversial pivot for Caitlin, abandoning her medical aspirations to become the cornerstone of their growing enterprise. With her internship on the horizon, the pressure intensified. The couple faced a painful decision. The reality of her having to abandon her studies to sustain the business became a somber possibility. "We're building this for our future, Caitlin. Once we reach this next goal, I'll make sure you can go back to school," Alan assured her, but his eyes betrayed the fanaticism with which he pursued his business goals. Caitlin, torn between her dreams and her dedication to their shared success, found herself at the heart of their enterprise, a linchpin that Alan, in his pursuit of entrepreneurial triumph, had come to rely on perhaps too heavily. 5 years had seen Alan's venture burgeon into a thriving enterprise with a staff roster of over 50. Caitlin, living in the lap of luxury, found herself at a crossroads of contentment and restlessness. Ellen, ever the provider, assured her she didn't lift a finger, but Caitlin yearned for more than just the trappings of success. She longed for a sense of personal fulfillment. One tranquil evening, as they sat in their expansive living room, Caitlin turned to Alan with a quiet determination in her voice. "Honey, remember the promise we made during those grinding days of building the business? You said once things stabilize, I could return to my studies." Alan looked at her, his expression one of gentle confusion. "Baby, why dive back into that stress? We're financially secure. There's no need for you to worry about money anymore." "It's not about the money, Alan," Caitlin replied, her gaze steady and sincere. "It's about completing what I started. It's about me." Alan's voice softened, a mix of bewilderment and concern. "But baby, why can't you just enjoy the life we have built? Why can't you be happy with what we have?" Caitlin's response was a heavy sigh, her eyes reflecting a sea of unspoken thoughts. She left the room, leaving Alan perplexed and pondering her discontent. In the following days, Alan noticed a shift in Caitlin's demeanor. She, who once brimmed with ambition and zest, now moved through her days with a subdued air. She seemed to have relinquished her fiery spirit, and her constant presence at home, immersing herself in domesticity, struck Alan as peculiar. Alan, in a bid to lift her spirits, suggested, "Honey, why don't you take some time for yourself? A vacation, perhaps? What about Cancun?" Caitlin's response was swift and sharp. "I don't need another trip to Cancun, Alan. We've been there enough." Alan's anxiety surfaced, his voice tinged with frustration. "Then what is it that you want? Just tell me. You seem dissatisfied with everything. You don't want to travel. You don't seem happy here. Any other wife would be ecstatic with this life." Caitlin paused, her hands seizing their work as she turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "It's not about being like any other wife, Alan. It's about being me." This conversation marked a turning point, a gentle but firm assertion of Caitlin's needs, desires, and the individuality she felt slipping away amidst the grandeur of their shared success. One day, Caitlin smiled with a gentle resignation. "Alan, do you remember when we used to fantasize about owning a quaint house in the countryside?" Alan nodded, his voice carrying a hint of pride. "Of course I remember. But look at what we've already built here. A spacious home with an expansive backyard." "That's not quite what I meant," she clarified, taking a seat across from him, her eyes alight with the flicker of a long-lost dream. "I'm talking about a real country house, one nestled in a cozy village, perhaps shielded from the incessant pings of work emails and away from the digital world." He raised an eyebrow in mild amusement. "That's an unexpected desire, but if it's what you truly want, then yes, let's do it. I must warn you, though, the responsibility of finding and refurbishing it would rest on your shoulders." With a peal of laughter, Caitlin leaned forward and planted a quick kiss on his cheek. "I wouldn't have it any other way." A mere week later, Caitlin burst into his office, her eyes gleaming with uncontainable excitement. "Alan, I found your house. It's not just any house. It's embraced by a birch grove, with a serene river a mere stone's throw away. You must see it for yourself." His wife's infectious enthusiasm curved through his usual reserve. It had been eons since he'd witnessed that particular sparkle in her eyes, the one that reminded him of the vibrant woman he'd fallen in love with. That weekend, they made the trip to the village. Standing before the property, Alan's practicality overshadowed his romanticism. The house stood silent and forlorn, a sturdy structure that time had forgotten. Noticing the return of that captivating sparkle in her eyes, Alan sighed in acquiescence. "All right, we'll buy the house. But remember, the refurbishing is your project. With the upcoming ranch opening, I'll be swamped and won't be able to assist." Her response was to wrap him in an impulsive embrace. "Thank you. Just wait and see. Once I breathe new life into it, you'll fall in love with this place." 2 months flew by in a world of business meetings and late-night calls for Alan. Drained, he returned home, the weight of endless negotiations bearing down on him. He had a scant 48 hours to spend in the sanctuary of his home before the relentless pace of work summoned him again. Caitlin settled in beside him with an inviting warmth. "Alan, I want you to spend these next 2 days with me at our country retreat. I think it might just charm you." Initially, Alan felt the pull to decline, tempted by the lure of familiar comforts, but curiosity nudged him gently towards acceptance. As they arrived, the transformation of the house before him was remarkable. Caitlin had masterfully blended rustic allure with modern comforts in a way that was subtle yet strikingly effective. "Alan, this is amazing," he admitted, his eyes sweeping over the space. His wife flitted around, her presence bringing the house to life as she prepared their meal. Imbued with a sense of vitality and a refreshing youthfulness, Alan found himself. The weekend unfolded like a chapter from a storybook romance. There were shy glances from Caitlin, and within Alan, a flicker of bewilderment ignited. He couldn't recall the last time their relationship shimmered with this kind of vitality. Come Monday, the city reclaimed them, and work ensnared Alan in its familiar grip. "Caitlin, I'll be away for a week," he mentioned casually, the tinge of routine coloring his voice. "I trust he'll be fine without me. There are some urgent matters I must attend to." Caitlin responded with a lightness that piqued his interest. "Oh, I'll simply retreat to our little sanctuary in the country." Again, "What is it that captures your attention there?" he inquired, his curiosity laced with a hint of concern. She met his gaze, a trace of something like apprehension flickering in her eyes. "Just embracing the solitude and the natural beauty," she assured him. Throughout his business trip, Alan's thoughts wandered back to the country house and Caitlin's newfound vibrancy. It was uncanny, the transformation she underwent with each visit, emerging more radiant and content. Alan felt a tightness in his chest, a confluence of confusion and determination. Only half a year ago, Caitlin was adrift, but now she was awash with a newfound joy. Compelled to unravel this mystery, he bided his time. As soon as Caitlin left, he hastily gathered what he needed and made a beeline for the country house, driven by a mix of apprehension and resolve. Alan harbored a gnawing suspicion that Caitlin's solitary trips to the country house concealed more than mere solitude in nature. His mind raced with the unthinkable possibility of another presence, another person who might explain the radiance she seemed to gain from each visit. Her explanations cloaked in ambiguity did little to assuage his growing doubts. Driven by this fear, he surreptitiously installed hidden cameras throughout the house. His heart wrestled with the ethics of his actions as he departed, leaving behind the silent sentinels that would soon reveal the truth of Caitlin's retreats. As he sat in his hotel room, the weight of the day's meetings dissipated in anticipation of the footage that awaited him. Alan's fingers hovered over the laptop, a part of him recoiling at the invasion of privacy he had orchestrated. He considered abandoning this digital voyeurism and confronting Caitlin directly, yet the lingering uncertainties propelled him forward. He needed to see what lay hidden within those walls. The video was coarse, but Caitlin was unmistakable as she settled into the familiar space, her actions mundane until the footage betrayed her secrecy. Ellen's heart sank as a middle-aged man entered the frame, sharing an embrace with Caitlin that seemed to stretch beyond the bounds of friendship. The inability to discern the man's face only fueled Ellen's imagination with pain. Rushing back from his business engagements, Ellen's mind was a maelstrom of betrayal and confusion. He found Caitlin alone, a scene starkly different from the one seared into his memory by the camera's unblinking eye. Her puzzled gaze followed him as he moved restlessly through the house, a futile search for evidence of the intruder. Finally, sitting beside her, he confronted the silent question between them with digital proof. "Caitlin, I know everything. What's going on here?" His voice was like a tight wire strained and barely holding. Caitlin's gaze dropped, the weight of discovery anchoring her eyes to the floor, the reality of her secret unraveling before them both. She was swathed in guilt for keeping Ellen at bay from the hidden chapters of their life. Ellen felt a maelstrom of emotions as Caitlin began to apologize. The more she spoke, the deeper the confusion seemed to burrow into his understanding of the situation. His mind, tangled in the web of betrayal he had spun, struggled to make sense of her explanation. "You had to contact him?" "Contact who?" The question was like a fissure in the dam of his comprehension, through which the truth began to trickle. Caitlin's eyes met Ellen's, a clear stream of sincerity flowing from her. The dawning realization that their thoughts had been parallel lines, close but never meeting, prompted a heavy sigh from her. "Ellen, it seems we've got our wires crossed. Let me clarify everything. I love you, honey, and I would never..." Her attempt to smooth the creases of misunderstanding was interrupted as an elderly lady entered, the fragrance of fresh flowers preceding her. The room felt warmer with her presence, a soothing balm to the palpable tension. "Hi, Mrs. McGee," Caitlin greeted, her voice in a gentle chime amidst the sudden influx of company. "This is my husband, Ellen." Ellen looked from his wife to the new people, asking a question without speaking. Soon after, the man from the video walked in. He looked just like Ellen's dad. Overwhelmed by the unfolding scenario, Ellen struggled to reconcile his emotions. Here stood the man he had deeply adored, yet simultaneously resented for the wounds of the past. "Hello, Ellen." Ron's familiar voice filled the space, bridging the gap between the son's bewilderment and the father's calm presence. Caitlin, driven by a longing for a complete family, had sought out Ron, who had been living in solitude. Her first encounter with Ron left an indelible mark on her heart. Discovering him in a state of neglect, Ravaged by illness and the solitude imposed by his ex-wife's departure, she felt compelled to act. Ron's tales of estrangement from Alan, laced with remorse for past wrongs, resonated with her deeply. Ron acknowledged that he had been unwittingly ensnared by his ex-wife's manipulative tactics. She had spun a web of lies about their son Alan, falsely demonizing him and creating a rift between him and Ron. When the veil of deceit was finally lifted, Ron was left in ruins, mourning the irreversible estrangement from his son. He also discovered that Amy had another son, which shed some light on her possible animosity towards Alan. Time had moved on since their divorce, yet the repercussions of the past lingered. Caitlin's portrayal of the person Alan had matured into moved Ron deeply, his emotions manifesting in a stream of tears. He earnestly requested that she care for Alan and shield him from harm. Carrying the weight of his former misjudgments, Ron beseeched Caitlin to withhold the details of his plight, believing himself undeserving of facing Alan after all that had transpired. When Caitlin offered a hand of support, Ron's resignation was clear. His belief that Alan harbored resentment was a barrier he wasn't willing to cross. Caitlin transported Ron to the tranquility of a country house, promising to uphold a solemn vow of silence towards Alan. As she stepped into the role of Ron's caregiver, she was determined to nurse him back to independence. The country abode, surrounded by the serene whispers of nature, became a haven for Ron's convalescence, as Caitlin devoted herself to his recovery, guiding him towards regaining his strength and autonomy. As Ron regained his mobility, he began to engage in various household activities, finding solace in the routine and simplicity of daily tasks. Unbeknownst to him, it was during these moments of domesticity that Alan glimpsed his father through the lens of a security camera. Caitlin and Ron's partnership flourished beyond the walls of their retreat. They became guardians of well-being for their elderly neighbors, weaving a fabric of care that blanketed the community. Caitlin found solace and significance in this labor of love, a poignant reminder of her intrinsic value. Ron stood in front of his son looking very sorry and humble. "Alan, my boy, I'm really sorry for all the hurt I've caused before and for coming back so unexpectedly. Your wife, she's been my savior. If you want, I'll go away and not disturb your life." In the silent communion that followed, Alan's gaze lingered on Caitlin, seeing her not just as his partner, but as the architect of reconciliation. The weight of years seemed to lift off Ron's shoulders as he stood before his son, filled with remorse and a newfound understanding. Tears seemed to lift in that instant. Alan stood somewhat aloof amidst the hum of activity in the country house. The air was filled with the chatter of the neighbors and the clinking of teacups. Ron, agile and attentive, was in his element, fetching items for Caitlin, who was the day's quiet orchestrator. It was a dance of quiet understanding between them, and as Alan watched them, an epiphany slowly washed over him. His voice was loud and full of regret. "Caitlin, I'm really sorry. I've been the bad one here, only thinking about myself and what I need, not caring about you. I didn't see the truth, and I wrongly didn't trust you. Can you forgive me? If you want, you can work here all the time." Caitlin's eyes met his with a mixture of warmth and mischief. "That's a generous offer, but it's not feasible, unfortunately. Is it because you're upset with me?" Alan's voice held a tremor of concern. "A bit, yes," she admitted, "but mostly because I won't have the time. Full-time work isn't in the cards for me for, say, the next 3 years or so." Confusion played across Alan's face. A mix of hope and disbelief flickered in Alan's eyes as realization dawned. Caitlin, embracing him, tightly whispered, "Remember those 2 magical days here? They were more than just a rekindling. Alan, we're gonna have a baby." The news struck Alan with the force of a revelation, almost staggering him. He gently held Caitlin back, searching her eyes for certainty. "Are you serious? Absolutely certain?" Her laughter was like music, dispelling any shadows of doubt. "Completely sure." The doctor confirmed it. "We're gonna be parents." In a swirl of elation, he lifted her into a joyous twirl, their laughter mingling with the continued buzz of the gathering, a symphony of new beginnings. Alan's motion ceased, and as he steadied himself from the exuberant twirl, his eyes sought out his father's. In the depths of Ron's gaze there was a clear well of remorse, an unspoken apology that resonated with the heavy silence that filled the room momentarily. Alan had spent years entangled in a web of resentment, but now, as he glanced at Caitlin, his perspective shifted. There she stood, the architect of reunions and revelations, the woman who had gently unraveled the knotted past with her compassion. Gratitude welled up in him, a silent hymn of thanks for the incredible partner fate had handed him. A partner who had not only become his heart's compass, but had also inadvertently steered them towards this moment of familial healing. With the past grievances that had long cast a shadow on their relationship momentarily quieted by the potential of forgiveness, Alan moved towards his father. "I spent years wishing for understanding, Dad," he said, his voice carrying the weight of those silent tears. "Maybe it's time we both tried to understand each other." Prawn, visibly moved by the gesture, nodded, his usual composure giving way to a more tender vulnerability. "I'd like that, Alan. More than anything." Caitlin's presence, a beacon of patience and love, bridged the gap between father and son. Her gentle influence had sown the seeds of reconciliation, and now those seeds were sprouting, tender shoots of hope breaking through the hardened soil of their shared history. Alan felt the transformation, not just in the room, but within himself. He had been poised on the precipice of becoming a father, and now he was rediscovering what it meant to be a son. The dual revelation was both humbling and profound. As the day wore on, the country house buzzed with activity and conversation. Neighbors came and went, each leaving behind words of encouragement and shared happiness. In the waning light of the day, as the guests departed, the trio Alan, Caitlin, and Ron sat together in a reflective silence, each lost in their thoughts, yet connected by the unspoken bond that had been strengthened today. "Thank you,"